I found a terrifying TikTok. A home alone on Halloween. Have a good night, sweetie. We'll be back after midnight, my mom said. Don't forget we left extra candy in the basement in case you run out. I know, you told me like 6 times, just go, have fun, I'll be fine. They were going to a Halloween party which made what my dad said next slightly ironic. Okay, we're going. Remember, no parties, no girls, no drinking or drugs. Do lots of drugs, have unprotected sex, invite people over, and get drunk. Okay, got it. Thanks. I shut the door behind them and was left alone, mercifully, finally, peacefully alone. If you've ever been 15 years old, maybe you'll remember that wonderful feeling when your parents finally go out for the night and leave you alone to your own devices. It's magical. The sun had recently set and it was dark outside on the moonless night. Trick-or-treaters would be out soon, coming to the door in droves. I figured I'd watch a few TikToks, then pick a movie after that. I opened the app with one finger, nimbly unwrapping a Reese cup with my remaining digits. The video which popped up on my feed was dark, difficult to make out. It looked like the person recording it was in a forest. Then I saw concrete stairs and the familiar-looking wooden boards of a deck or a porch. I almost scrolled past it, but then noticed the deck looked familiar, as did the front door in the video. Ding dong, ding dong. I paused the clip. The Reese single quotes S cup remained UNEATENN. My hand imputed up to my lips to Kiabite. Thinkingth, kids out city cool de aminute. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding 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 dong, ding 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 ding. I'd got up from a chair, theppi see if candleaway, and stalked angrily to the door. Damn kids, golden gestuation, tidied break the claffic, swinging a panther, ready toy latherbs. I looked out to swallowtaries, glancing ground recur or trader sanny whereben. No their house was where Ted, and notice said forthers, mine was the in line, and it was pitch black outsideno. And noticed, superch light hullafantera, since scythe juice orphanten. I close set the door on talkpool, my heart beat no whiffle stiffink. Sitting down, if old likey cooldledrolls, my muscles reference, a floorboard Kirkov, from the second floor, and he jumped, then told my sviffy foesben. It was probably justinkstiek, Ilianid back into Brentisen. When gad moveden teletistum, had to get us said talks the wheezing, moaning noises if it didn't tid, sounding host leasts. Thefestling geffeltent, sounding licky bone tischen and the ashes is, or lick muffled rams, holding my feninden in pause at the tiquiquinte. If that been close to deafened, the secamera panadrangens gloved findrupales. Ding dong, then a failurson for craffant. In the video, nobodika medither, they began to presendel, faster and intense. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding 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 dong, ding 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 ding. It was to semmelif and tort and tosh and shint. It sounded liquantor and ton. Al thought it was past me. Looking down the thof and taunt, I saw what was Orwintons. That titel off of a Valedwalezes is over. It had just been pushed him up, and a third creek and a goalesm. From the second floor, Seuss times and done in Tuesday. My heart began to dared. I cowled feel it intently. Men throw a tan Mofendrian desert. Mori and Morwitensix. With a trembling ferg, escrelejupan make tech. Getting rid of the von tantandy. Anything else. It had just been a session. Nothing more. Irrefuse sedok nefaritizi. That was next pos. The following avals, and noticed, had the previous womble. I wasn't sure. It seemed highly too still as a sit played in a ticed thefamalicory cock, looking their black showed feet and the grashes. Then suddenly the winteries till a portrait samundes, someone ilsius. I opt, holding my breath. Do thos est in a telelilis, just like a thwadeen and dear nickikikikik. Thistomether weldol. Southik nakwafaviaf. Bang. Bang, 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 jumping up from east. Entered these in the fofamirifem, as if there was a village doll. There wasn't a dubingt. They wearied my backter. Tessa Mepperson will querig toss. Feel a linksident fluff of shul see leo shul leo. I ran at the back to feast tease a mia. It was probably me combing, trying to mess with me. I was spicid if a foe's tetted, swinging a pantheon dictin tick. I looked outside in tentation. There was no bodier. Is step a dutin beffer. Wilking onto the grotrans, tidy door hung upon tanty and nitinen. Hey, ik know what you're doing. You done skirmishal. Commandjitum. That last statimer wantes. Going back and say, I close at the door and dendick. From where he stood odors. Thasters to thumographantor. Tinter nestontally. Drenched in blackness. Butignored at tantwantoon. Sisa during gan closti. Fingelinguf samarafandek. Tanter was softlimstrent. A basement. When of rusidit. But this demise lost ainty. At least it wold o fi me. But Frauwat. That is still didn't now. Is twas beginning giardicty. It could be anyone. It could be murder. My knees buckle slightly as the thought crossed my mind. Intent back to Thultarant. Holding thephanisme, I debated calentries. Ithat about the fended. Hamum, I desantic tondrantes. Had I was nobody tauntant ten. It sounded delusional. De we wold commodolidziam. Egesiu erite. Herili wasn't trabala babila babam. Maybe next year there was no way of falatofen. Whoever it was I called handle him. Kettingup Island down to Halibrabri. Asanasagagathended disme in ear. The lights went out. The entire house was suddenly completely dark, eerily quiet, lacking all machine noise. And of course he fell fifth with the baitin muffle of felladus finding the door of falafantoffy. The entire house wayaquis, dark and empty as flaclelix. When I was right to Bugterrence, interred the Sundafuricton, they were in Sedethius, thus flim seekand fortentant, judging Bethaluxov. I didn't the muckdame. All over Wassen Thofastoras, he had every toffel at 10, Tanti sound den grants, estraddled dan shillifantesen as Nollinger kringafistium. Heide keduta fairy quintenen and my intention was lagtry 911. Buta didn't even catch. Aldowed crashiko fontoff. Clearly no. Running toward short terrace. There was more than 10 of. My phone was blinking from where it lay on the RECLINERS armrest. I ran over to it in the pitch black darkness, bashing me shinagaraga laffixtiazzzz. If an alariachetti clintoon, just as he hard halaben terrainsens, thine lie thingikun taunt. And eat a dosu wet will a wit it lit Lunkilly go tit and torix, casting through a wintifs, walking governed it toward, eyes other was nabidi, no culprit waka defamefaf, mix phonetting de fentry pheasic, it was alling toetic, sorry about you order, a voice was saying giviv, it sounded just lellard, to you av anurandi. sebagintha bastork starism amazes annn as azes tasman nns test. Eha telekurais, my brents up and rentin adult lightsterphone. Staring at my phone, watching that same video over and over again. It was our basement, and our candy stash. Really, yun sathriun tiff, my mom askadenkrius. We single quotes regana have to talk about cutting back on your phone time. Idald have a thogala witustia. Mabel watch askragosium. Mistad sound a betalistus. My mom was going don't toes. I reeled with ostart. Mom. Got anther. Ild. But it was too late. Yep. He tealthika condori. Urine samuktra. Mister. Ithout yadu didolav tens. That was the neglaters ter. And that and Cyrillera tonelli toth the place where fenties. Otter family had fair fentis. Chultrip. Thanisa naprat. Lonticlicked. Heel sorry lilevendi just not liquorus. I guess. Themadaughterus willeri. Was quiet tended latus. Gregandalisweriterum. I found out from Mertz, who had found friend tetum. They found out some other details to other past owners of the house, some more controversial than others. It is not Gregandiligi kefik. Terrified to sleep, it's the author own. Theanagregdal dodob. Heste supentheatic. That's why it was bored. You hispred omen stare after me brents upon tontant. Eyelid and fenduth a wellisteri. I can see a muffer waiting. Just don't evern dorixtos. All henids is a lantrin terran. And yadnet one toran tune. There as reason o puerictastic. Halloween will belans. In just a couplux. And me dadges studuk tor dashiti teat. Thus hutter serservtoref. The doors hanging wide open. He did it while I was at school. Weva gotta let it tear. My did told me was brabbering looking vrymukalikliklik. Weva gotta let it breath. Story 2. When I was young, I had a home alone night. But mine wasn't funny. When I was a kid, a young teenager, frequently spent my Saturday nights babysitting my siblings. As the eldest of 3, I assumed this responsibility with no pay nor thanks to speak of. It was simply expected of me, one of my contributions to the family. I babysat so frequently because, my parents needed it. They'd had marriage problems in the past, and their counselor told them they should go on a weekly to revive the magic, rekindle the flame, all that good stuff. Yeah, it sucked to be robbed of a weekend evening, but it wasn't much of a burden. My parents were happier than they'd been in ages, and they both seemed genuinely excited for date night each week. I would have rather been doing other things, of course, but I'd seen my aunt and uncle go through a nasty divorce a few years back, and I desperately wanted my parents to stick together. And so it was that on the night of December 3rd, in the year 2006, I stood at the open front door of my secluded Colorado home, waving goodbye as my parents backed out of the icy driveway. "Drive safe," I called out, steam pouring from my mouth. I don't know if they heard me or not. Wrapping my arms around my torso in response to the wintry mountain air, I entertained myself for a few brief moments by exhaling forcefully and watching my breath float away into nothing. And there was truly nothing around me. Not a car or a creature in sight. It wasn't long before I grew bored and turned back into the warm house, nose tingling from the chill. Georgie and Kate were eating their dinner at the kitchen table. As I watched them, I couldn't help feeling like an only child. Georgie, 3 years my junior, was severely autistic and not talkative. He only spoke when he really wanted something, and only then in the simplest of words. Milk and sandwich was code for peanut butter and jelly with the crust cut off, which he was presently devouring. Kate, meanwhile, was still a baby, just shy of 2. The 9-year gap between them is glaring, but to this day my parents swear to me Kate wasn't an accident. Kind of like back in high school, when I swore to them I had no idea how those magazines got under my mattress. But I digress. The kids finished dinner, and I set them up with their entertainment for the night. Georgie in his room with the PlayStation 2, which was a hot commodity in those days, and Kate in her crib, in front of Sesame Street. Myself, I ignited the basement fireplace in the overheads, and curled up with a book by the light of our Christmas tree. God, that was a nice house. Not a day goes by that I don't miss it. I read in perfect contentment. For nearly an hour, night had fallen by then, and the room had become toasty. I was beginning to doze off when I heard Georgie's heavy footfalls descending the staircase. I sat upright and looked at him expectantly as he waddled into the room. "No more knocking," he said, brow furrowed in annoyance. I shook my head. "In not knocking," I said. "Is someone at the door?" Georgie just stared at me blankly. "Georgie," I said, more clearly this time, "did someone knock on the door?" "No more knocking," he repeated. "Knocking on window." "Knocking on window?" I stood up, now wide awake. "Georgie, is someone knocking on your window?" "No more," he replied simply. I stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was probably just one of my friends playing a prank, I thought, but being alone in a house that big makes you a little jumpy. My mind started to race through the situation. I was a 13-year-old boy in a nice house on the hilly outskirts of a Colorado mountain town. The streets were engulfed in trees, and there were no homes within a quarter-mile of my own. Our road saw next to no traffic, and the police station was a good 15 minutes away. It was probably my friends, I thought, but what if it wasn't? "Follow me," I told Georgie. Hand trembling slightly, I turned the knob and glanced up the staircase. It was dark up there. The only light came from Kate's room. Kate. I sprinted up the stairs to her room, where she remained happily perched in her crib, squawking with delight as Elmo fiddled with his crayons. I breathed a sigh of relief, but still my heart thumped in my chest. "This is silly," I told myself. "Be a man." I made my way down the hall to Georgie's room and stood tentatively at its door. Taking a deep breath, I gently pushed the door ajar, reaching for the light switch and thinking better of it if this was the worst-case scenario. Then I didn't want our mystery intruder to know where in the house I was. The only light in the room came from Star Wars Battlefront's game paused screen. I listened for a moment, but heard nothing. I began to suspect that Georgie had simply imagined the knocking. Somewhat exasperatedly, I moved to the window and flicked up a blind to reveal nothing, just a landscape of freshly fallen snow backed by a quiet, lonely road. I watched the peaceful night, relieved as the large flakes fell softly to the ground, my eyes trailing an individual fractal all the way to the footprints just beneath the window's frame. At first I did not comprehend them. I just stared transfixed at the deep imprints in the snow. Shoes, a man's shoes. None of my friends wore the size, of that I felt sure. I traced them backwards from the window to the sidewalk, from whence this intruder had evidently come. But where did they lead? It was a bright night. The moon shone proudly between the clouds. My eyes followed the steps across the front yard. but once they passed behind the giant pine, they disappeared. My heart leapt to my throat. Whoever had walked behind that tree was still there. In panic, I quickly backed away from the window. Georgie, sensing my fear, began to whimper. "No, no, no," I muttered, desperate to keep him quiet. I flicked the television off and led Georgie out of the room. I quickly pulled Kate from her crib, powered her TV down as well, and carried her down the stairs in the blackness. "Can't see," Georgie said, and Kate began to cry. I shushed her hurriedly as we descended. Once in the basement den, I unplugged the Christmas tree so that the only light in the room came from the embers of the dying fire. I sat Georgie down on the couch and settled Kate in his arms. "Sit right here," I directed, staring into his eyes. "Don't move. Do you understand? Do not move. I need to call the police. I would have called my parents, but this was 10 years ago, and they didn't have cell phones. So I took the stairs quickly and quietly, tiptoeing to the phone hanging from the wall of our living room. I picked up the phone and dialed 911, but I heard nothing. Silence. I slammed it on the receiver and picked it up again. Nothing. I think it was around this point that I started to cry. I couldn't help it. I was scared. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that the storm had killed the phone line, but there wasn't much of a storm. The snow was steady, sure, but there wasn't even a breeze. Certainly nothing that could have disabled our phone. Tentatively, I walked into Kate's room and peeked out the window. My first glance was toward the tree, of course, where the footprints stopped, but now they continued. Sometime while I was herding my siblings downstairs, whoever was behind the tree had moved. I followed the footsteps across my frozen front yard to a man standing near the driveway. He was looking right at me. My breath stopped. I was frozen in place. This was not one of my friends. I had never seen this man before, but he was looking at me with an eerie blankness. He was wearing a black turtleneck and black slacks, a lone dark spot on a blanket of purest white. My eyes never left him, and his never left me. We stood still, silently staring, for what seemed like an eternity. My heart thrummed in my chest, and I felt nauseous. For the first time, gazing into this man's eyes from afar, I began to consider the possibility of my death. I thought of my dad's brother, who was killed in an accident at age 11. Forever 11, never growing up, frozen in time, and the memories of all who knew him as a soul of eternal youth. At this, the tears flowed freely once more. "Please don't hurt us," I begged in a sobbing whisper. I knew he could not hear me, but I could not help myself. Finally, he broke eye contact with me and looked toward the heavens, toward the gently falling snow. He was saying something, but what I could not hear. I stared transfixed as he pulled a handful of dark powder from his pocket. Then, still gazing upward, still muttering to himself, he flung the stuff at his feet. I desperately wanted to run to get my siblings, but I thought that to let this man out of my sight would be unconscionably foolish. No, better to keep an eye on him. The house was still locked. I had the upper hand, I felt. Besides, I could not bring myself to look away from the strange ritual unfolding before me. The man had removed his sweater and flung it carelessly to the ground behind him. He was no longer staring skyward, but his lips continued to move. I trained my eyes intently upon his mouth, trying with no success to read his words, when I saw something glint in the moonlight. It was a knife-long, callous bladeuic he had removed from his other pocket. It bore dark stains already. From what I covered my mouth to hush a scream as the man, still muttering to himself, ran the edge of the blade along his pale, distended stomach. A thin red line appeared along his abdomen, and blood of the deepest shade began to dribble from the wound. The streams trickled down his belly and fell ungracefully upon the black powder at his feet. At this the man stared skyward once more, face contorted in a gruesome smile. He was sobbing uncontrollably, and mucus ran freely from his nostrils, but he looked happy. Beyond happy-elated, my stomach churned in revulsion. This man was in ecstasy. I watched, almost entranced by this bizarre unfolding, when the man's face changed suddenly. He looked directly at me once more, and his eyes appeared unhinged. Still clutching the knife, he began to sprint directly at my window. I took one look at the weapon this man brandished and instinctively fled the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and was halfway down the stairs when I heard the window shatter. The man screamed loudly in pain. As I reached the basement, I locked the door behind me and ran to Georgie and Kate. "No more screaming," Georgie pleaded. No more screaming," I agreed in hushed tones, stroking his hair in an effort to calm him down. Kate, meanwhile, seemed happy as a clam. I strained, listening intently as he inside the house. I still clung to some naive hope that he had injured himself on the glass and had retreated. Or perhaps he had been weakened by his self-inflicted wound. Finally, I heard a subtle but unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. He was indeed inside the house, and by the sound of it, was trying to be quiet. I silently guided Georgie and Kate into a storage closet and closed the door behind us, manipulating the handle to make as little noise as possible. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, listening to the ceiling creak threateningly above us. Then I realized I don't know why it took me so long that we were not trapped. We still had a way out. I saw in my mind's eye window well in the bathroom down the hall, the only access our basement had to the outside world. Almost as if on cue, a frustrated scream echoed from above, followed by a tremendous crash. He had pulled something to the ground, perhaps the entertainment stand, or maybe the hutch. As here the man shrieked hysterically, "How dare you hide from him?" To this day I don't know who he was talking about, but it was at that moment, the moment I heard him begin to descend the stairs, that I made my move, holding Kate in one arm and guiding Georgie with the other. We began our flight down the hallway. As we reached the bathroom, I stared fixedly at the window near the ceiling. It would be a tight fit, but we could make it. I flung the window open, stood on the toilet, and placed Kate gently in the shallow window well. Then I stepped off and told Georgie to get on. "Yucky, gross, no standing on toilet," he said, looking embarrassed. I heard the man fumble with the locked handle at the base of the stairs. Time was running out. I'm not proud of what I did next, but it was the only way I could think of to get Georgie to cooperate. I smacked my brother roughly across the face and grabbed him by the shirt with both hands. "Georgie, get on the fucking toilet," I snarled at him the first time I had ever said that word. He began to wail in pain and surprise, but he did step onto the toilet all the same. "Climb out the window," I directed in a harsh tone, and as he grabbed the ledge, I used all the strength I could muster to help push him up. Once he almost slipped back down Amos, but he was stronger than I thought he was, and managed to pull himself back As I clambered out myself, I heard a raucous crash. The man had broken down the basement door. With one last hoist, I pulled my legs up through the window and shut it quietly behind me. As I helped my siblings out of the well, I heard one last anguished shout from the man, muffled through the pane of glass. "Why are you hiding from him?" Cold, screamed Georgie as I led him, barefoot, through the snowy grass. In panic, I shushed him, but it was no use. He and Kate were both crying quite loudly by this point. My only hope was to get them as far away from the house as possible. I heard a distant crash from inside the house, and I quickened our pace. Feet numb, I sprinted through the yard to the sidewalk and practically had to drag Georgie onto it. "Bathroom light on," he said pleadingly. He was obsessive about turning off lights and electronics before leaving, and he was correct. We had left the bathroom light on in our haste. I ignored him and rushed us down the frozen pavement, stepping on sharp rocks and sticks, and not even comprehending it. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I didn't know what we were headed toward. All I knew is what we were headed away from. The snow was falling much harder by this point. I could already see it collecting in a pile on Kate's head. Her nose was beet red and dripping with snotty needed to get her inside. But where? I looked ahead and saw a light off in the distance. The Garland's house. ID said maybe a grand total of 6 words to Mr. and Mrs. Garland my entire life. But that was our one option. It was in their house that we would seek refuge. My house was now around the corner and out of sight, but I did not let up the pace until Georgie tripped on something and landed in a dark puddle. "Hey!" he screamed indignantly, looking back at his stumbling block. In the glow of the distant street light, I could see Georgie had fallen into blood. A dead man lay, face up and eyes open, on the sidewalk. Snow had fallen onto most of him, and he had been mostly invisible until Georgie's feet had connected with his midsection. I remembered the dark stain I had seen on our intruder's knife. "Come on," I pled, wrenching my eyes away from the grisly scene as I pulled Georgie to his feet. We ran for another 60 seconds, maybe, and finally reached the Garland's front door. The window into their parlor was open, and a fire was roaring. Mr. and Mrs. Garland sat, drinking tea in cozy armchairs. I pounded ferociously on their door. They answered together, utter bewilderment stamped on their faces. I handed Kate to Mrs. Garland and collapsed into tears. The police arrived at my home 15 minutes later and apprehended the man, unconscious, lying in a crumpled heap on the floor of our basement bathroom. They discovered him with a fractured skull, many deep lacerations from the window of Kate's room, and intestines partially protruding from the wound on his gut. He had slipped in his attempt to climb where we had climbed, hit his head, and knocked himself out. Apparently, he confessed under questioning that he was a member of a strange cult, a cult which, as far as anyone can tell, does not even exist. He claimed to have been taking part in a ritual which required the sacrifice of a pure soul, and my autistic brother had been his target that night. My parents have not shared with me all the details of what happened after that night, but as far as I know, our intruder is currently rotting in a cell. The man he killed, the man lying on the sidewalk, was a friend of my father who lived 2 streets over. He had called his wife on his cell phone not long before he died, informing her of a suspicious man dressed in black stalking around the neighborhood. My parents arrived home from their date to find police swarmed around the block and their home crime scene. my father relocated at work, and we had moved across the Rockies to Salt Lake City just 2 weeks later. Kate is now a bratty middle schooler. As far as I'm concerned, just perfect. Georgie, now 21. Hasn't changed a bit, but he loses his mind if someone knocks on a window. As for me, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie now. I climb mountains with narrow trails and steep ridges. I go cave diving in places where you shouldn't, all, I think, in an attempt to recreate the fearful intensity of that one snowy night long ago. But it never works. The closest I come is when I'm alone in my room in the dead of night. Then alone is when the real fear sets in. Story 3. I thought I was home alone last night. My mom was on her routine night shift at the hospital, and I knew I wouldn't see her till the next morning. Probably in a deep sleep on her bed, likely still in her uniform. I always made her breakfast before I would leave for school in the morning, so she could wake up to a nice meal. I use the word nice loosely. It's the best I could do considering I'm 16 and failed my home economics class last year. But my mom never minded the toast, scrambled eggs, and turkey bacon platter left on her nightstand. We had said our goodbyes around 10:15, and I got myself comfortable on the couch with my dog to watch some TV. I turned the lights off over us to set the scene and make it feel more immersive. I had got through one Dateline episode when I decided that I could enjoy the experience a little more if I grabbed my bong. So I went upstairs and down the long, narrow hallway that led to my wing of the house. I was the only occupied room on this side of the house. The other rooms were my dad's old office and the guest room, though that room has had a guest in it for years. Ever since my dad's passing, my mom and I haven't even wanted to host other people here. Instead, it hosts the overload of clutter I find at the end of every school year. Clothes that I no longer want and plan on selling or donating. Paintings I worked months on but never hang up, and other miscellaneous items that aren't used but can't seem to be let go of either. I opened my bedroom door and grabbed the piece off my nightstand. It was almost a sculpture rather than a cheesy bong you might imagine when thinking of a stoner. It was about 16 inches tall and made completely out of this blue, hand-blown glass that resembled the color the ocean looks after a series of rough waves. The glass swirled in an upward motion towards the mouthpiece that made it look like it was water, frozen in time. My favorite feature of this prized possession is its ability to glow in the dark. After letting it sit in the sun for a bit, flecks in the glass would glow a bright green at night. I walked back down the hallway with it, then back down the stairs until I was sitting down on the couch next to my dog, Peppy. He was sound asleep as I started to grind up the green, sticky plant matter, which was genuinely what the name was, plant matter. It was this new strain I had just bought from my regular plug from the next town over. He had told me he just recently got a limited supply of this stuff, and asked me if I could be one of his test subjects to see if he should buy more. Without hesitation, I agreed. Discounted weed to just give my feedback. I'd be a fool not to take that offer, so I did. Holding it in my hand, I saw a multitude of colors that reflected off its crystals. It's common to see colors like purple and orange, but this stuff had shades of red, blue, and pink. Odd, I thought, but I was taken over by more intrigue than suspicion, so I continued to put some in a bowl and pack it down with my lighter. After the first inhale, I got the taste of ordinary weed, but soon followed by a slight trace of citrus. It was pleasant. I was paying extra attention to the experience so I could give a good, detailed report back to the plug like he had asked. About 15 minutes went by. Dateline was still playing, and this specific episode seemed to be extra interesting to me in my new hazy state. The cushions beneath me started to almost mold to my body. I felt as though I was sinking, yet weighed as light as a feather at the same time. My eyes started to get dry, and trying to keep them open became a task more so than a natural ability at this point. As I slowly started to move me, eyes behind my lids, I realized that he had fallen asleep. Istis thava been falefalistea, like I tusa delta fentinton. Theli lights above a friffentilly, like headlithum, bothelo the thirstonders, somethinga hadn't tone. Ing twasna pitch blicked, which was not very, t stucken thingent intent. Evosperalized, I mas physical you a farba memem tips offingers and toes. I stassen lie bleftictics. Sothery was almost completely anabletum over shalefum, continueth a perglaphismtum, consenting viewer, pepoas still supine blellies, bistus fuluniflef, it reaching forum, may be a wold oquistenden, and then what ethautomisel, wissethi helkel fintenton tififif. Scenes were wasnung, intel tas the gefentum, was nos defandold, as I fevri fiberibative fent. I reasonably stertict, not because of the fefiana fishafism, but because he herdered, ic nuthicius holicanti, id stenley house dontive, thissonerica gagostarist, santi wawazen mafent. Era crack that followed welladilidid dead to geffer felt to steert, hentering thefosts, steering gathin tourist, ouch. I did not want a sterant, treperson wawavevable, due to cold natrifes, ic nudanger wasclantui, iso memean wascovidelid, he wascoing tosi antoric, seconds felt lickmus, me hartrisids far fent, he was dripping in jivy, solasavrum twuffelidid, piercing ringing in gentles, tintrix the tatentent, throat hedum lighting, into doth what sweated, onanthum, what broketh them of teffens, muffled skreek of fomentomeami, it was the enliafant two stuns, I was a deer in headlicks, the perfect victory, and washered tossaferist, my mobilization, tri-hand method and tiffle, and d, once, then twice, till in threedimshintent, and final stare, as it center formal, my wide istrolafitefatuti, it was gigantic, its arms were ashlatif, it wegetwudden chingix prestanti, judge de hugumatrift. To might wasan and the offenti of fishishishishishishishishish. Danger as three added dentisen, tingled meristent, et reduced azeriustaf. Horrid sound staffodlilities, height witness said before eat, finding amusement astismi, alley cold owl was grease, my stream edwits, what elister dundelitin, it was just feet a one. Its longerms dang glingding, dragging along tentriff, the creaturum of a datal, tacking advantage of fallies, ilt nutha tragantisden, athis hortus stance, elasabulato swifflef stella still smelling witstist, tits malleus where fentism is, it hadanus abuut where westes, it was a most asfawenter, but the dedavil samodatavis, and it was knockless fellafentents, a hadodosa mething, and a thing that wafafla fellaftif that's one is a whiffentary, this is faint crengen torfiza, my bong, hamming stealthica cafacia fifths, but some thing with tantamiamism, so did it ecusadalifmentary, it worked, it's ability to grab and tintin, dot again and again and again, is blood wasn't trafficked, Instead it was darker, thinner like goo was everywhere. I felt tith at my face. Going to Mimouth, I saw what coverthic, floors and walls. Thesson was brutal, twiant cetrify fientism. No loft somewhere were fed wintefis. Its face was nullifiers. Is malignolth elefantingas. Is tudo verit spoquixic. Adrenaline, and morbidua fenterififififth mit, misd intent, misent, tisentus. I cowled knots to preffing, gasping for er foes bore. I'd woke a tothicafala feasteen, tinterleaf the thasiums, booty couldn't. My arms were preventrifent, tonasound doffmelting, thepids rails. Then, terslow one contententins. Geez, he was seen a hospitalmum, still covered dentics. Metallic smellingtons, thysot was not recliplical, but crimsonerd, soften fire vofofen tef, miss, the officer startefaled now, do you remembrangton ting? Tana question madden triff, off course seated, ice and think of illustraphy, thy Simon's fair felistillist, why yes, it was the first I vicarium there was fishing, teddy of Fasurga Valefanton. My mother laid vorleolically, elut warrant forfantory, atomi schwasliften, before he was a bluffant off if I screamed, estria medsaladr fire, ops of confusion, sadness, and danger. Out of my harsheries, I recognize a derafenti, illococaduptus derifofififififmes, and twachetish distentent, disgusting, and unforgettablistulous. Story 4. I walked home alone last night and narrowly made it out alive. Before I get the kind of lecture I'd expect from my father, I know that it's a risky move to walk home alone at night. I know, especially as a young woman, that it's unsafe, that anything could happen. Okay, I know. That being said, I come from a remarkably safe area. The kind of place where people don't shoot up in bed worried because they can't remember if they locked their doors. I've stumbled home drunk more than a few times myself, only to discover my keys long forgotten in the lock outside the next morning. Nobody really worried because nothing bad really happened here, not until a few months ago. Up until now, it wasn't actually considered that dangerous to walk alone after dark here. I did it pretty often myself. I don't have a car, and the public transportation system here is basically non-existent. I'm saving up to finally get myself a vehicle, but it's a bit of a vicious cycle. I can't afford a car, and the relative safety it would afford me so to get one. I have to work, and am a bartender, so that means working late shifts. There's been a recent spate of killings in my town, the first of its kind, really. We've seen a startling number of victims have all met their end at the hands of a frenzied knife attacker over the past few months, and the murders are all brutal beyond belief. The victims are stabbed to the point of death, and then some past the point of recognition, complete overkill. First it was one murder every so often, but now sometimes multiple victims are found after a single night. All of these people were simply going about their business as usual, walking home after dark from work or a friend's place or the store. Many of them died just yards from the safety and comfort of their homes, some mere steps away from their front doors. We've been forced to confront the fact that we almost certainly have a serial killer on our hands. With all of this weighing heavy on my mind, I guess you'll all understand why I was terrified, too. Find myself out on the street hours past nightfall and out of options. Surprisingly, I wasn't leaving a shift last night that I can plan for, and I actually have started carpooling with my co-workers over the past couple weeks. After realizing I was either out or working a startling amount of the nights when the killer added another victim to his count, I figured I needed to take these extra measures to ensure my safety. I was actually leaving my boyfriend's, boyfriend's house late last night after we got into a huge fight. It started with the same old stuff. He's incredibly jealous, aggressively possessive. Despite my being faithful for the several years we've been together, has never learned to trust me. Is always going on and on about my phone, insisting that if I don't respond to him, then I must be cheating. He was drunk, belligerent, and he wouldn't let it go last night. He pointed out several recent windows of time when I should have texted back, failing to realize that because these instances were in the middle of the night, I was either working or sleeping like any other normal person. The fight started at around 2 a.m. and ended over an hour later. He seriously broke my phone and kicked me out with no way to call for help. I had no cash on hand and no way to call a cab anyway. The buses had stopped running for the night, and the walk to the nearest bus stop probably would have been longer than the walk back home. I was drunk and alone and scared and helpless. I briefly considered knocking on a neighbor's door, but stopped myself. I didn't want to make a fuss. I could just walk home on my own. It wasn't a big deal. It'd only take me about 15 minutes. After all, I'd done it plenty of times before. With a renewed or feigned, more likely sense of courage, I plodded down the steps outside my ex's house and onto the sidewalk. I tried desperately not to think of the serial attacker, but it was no use. I couldn't silence my thoughts about what scared me most about the maniac, his preferred victims. It was his lack of preference that worried me most, actually. It sounds horrible to say, but in that moment I couldn't deny the thought if he only went for a certain kind of victim, like petite blonde girls, I'd have felt safer. As I continued my walk, I thought back on all of his victims, realizing that there was no common thread that could stitch his choice of victims together. There was no neat box that I could categorize them in, all in the name of making myself feel safer. Even more horrifying still, several men had fallen victim to the killer big men that sure as hell put up a fight, yet stood no chance against such vicious knife attacks. Chillingly, such a variety in victims communicated one thing to me, and as I turned down the next street about halfway through my walk, then the message was suddenly loud and fucking clear. His motives to kill didn't come from the normal things I'd expect. He didn't hate his mom. He wasn't angry at his first girlfriend for leaving him. He was killing a specific type of victim to live out his fantasies of vengeance against those he'd felt had wronged him. He killed for one reason and one reason alone. He loved to do it. With this realization, I found myself walking at a brisk pace, much quicker than usual. Before the onslaught of brutal killings, I used to enjoy my walks home, used to savor the quiet of the town after dark. It used to feel like the world belonged to me, like everything had slowed down for my enjoyment alone, like I was the only person left on the planet. Last night, it was different, a slight difference, but one that made a monumental impact. In my mind, I wasn't the only person anymore. Instead, it was just me and the knife-wielding fiend hell-bent on my destruction, just the hunter and its prey. I tried to silence these thoughts, tried in vain to reassure myself that we hadn't seen an attack in a little over 2 weeks. For a few moments, these internal reassurances actually worked. Perhaps it was the buzz I still had going. I felt myself start to calm. Though I remained vigilant, I had to be. My senses were on high alert so that I wouldn't get caught off guard. It was probably because of this heightened vigilance that I heard the sound from behind me. The first sign to prove that I was as far from alone as I feared. Before I'd even registered the disturbance, my head whipped around instinctively to look back over my shoulder. It was hard to see at first, but once I saw a quiver of movement in the distance, my stomach bottomed out and hit the ground. There was a man behind me, dressed head to toe in black. He was walking quite quickly himself with purpose, and I was about to stick around and find out what exactly his purpose was. I felt frozen in place for a moment, but once my body caught up with me, we were on our way further down the street. I was only a couple blocks away from my house at that point, and my feet carried me as fast as they could. But my shoes were uncomfortable, and I found it hard to move. I could still hear him shuffling along behind me, his footfalls coming at a disturbingly fast pace. From the sounds alone, I figured I'd hardly expanded the gap between us. He was in quick pursuit. I wagered a second glance over my shoulder. Big mistake. Like some true horror movie shit, I toppled over. Reflexively, I threw my hands out in front of me so that my palms made harsh contact with the paved sidewalk. I knew I had to get up, though, because his steps were growing much louder. I began to panic as I realized that this, not only because he was closer to me, but because he'd started to run fast. Adrenaline surged through me, urging me to scramble to my feet and get home, or at least to get help. I don't think I was even in control of my body anymore. I'd relinquished all operating power to my most basic, primal self, commanded only by the will to survive. I figure this must be true, that I must set all cognitive processes aside in favor of escape and survival. Because I startled awake this morning at home. I woke up in bed, naked, hungover, with a foul taste in my mouth that took a few times brushing my teeth to get rid of. Am a little worn out, but am safe. I don't look much like I was in a fight for my life, just some scrapes and bruises here and there. My fingernails are surprisingly dirty, with some substance caked underneath them, probably dirt from when I fell. It's hard to say exactly what happened, though. The adrenaline rush that came over me was so powerful that I have only a hazy recollection of the entire night that, of course, in conjunction with the alcohol, my survival instincts must have carried me those last few minutes until I burst through my door. It was a close call, for sure, but even closer when I opened my laptop to a news alert. Apparently, a morning jogger found a man's body, another victim of the killer. There are few details available now, but he was found on the same street I'd been pursued on last night, likely to have been killed near the same time I'd escaped. One of the detectives on the case reported that he expected an identification to be difficult, seeing as the victim had been nearly ripped to shreds. Like I said, I don't exactly remember what happened last night, but am comforted by the fact that I was so close to death, but that I made it home safe. Am exhausted, and I certainly look a little rough, but am okay. And that's something to be grateful for, don't you think? Story 5. Home alone for the weekend. My first foray into moving out of my parents' house was me moving in with my older sister. It was a 2-bedroom apartment close to our university, and I believe there's no better roommate than a sibling you're already used to living with and who you have an awesome relationship with. She had the master bedroom, as was expected due to seniority, and I had the second bedroom directly across from her room. A few months into our new living situation, she starts dating a Persian guy. Great dude. As their relationship continued, she spent more and more time out of the house. This was awesome because the two of us got along great and had no problems cohabiting. Having a place completely to yourself is the best way to go about it. Most weekends, the apartment contained just her cat Alfie, who mainly just did his own thing, and would surface every once in a while when he wanted some attention and me. One particular weekend, my sister left town with her boyfriend. They left on a Friday, and I was the one who took them to the airport. Friday night I wasn't feeling too hot, so I decided that rather than going out as I originally planned, I would just stay home and relax. I mostly played some EverQuest, judge not, but my body was beginning to ache, so I called it a night relatively early. It was around 10:30 p.m. I took a quick shower, put on my Sound of Rain like rainy mode, calm loop, and decided to go to sleep. While trying to sleep, with my body aching the way it was, I decided I'd sleep on my back. Just after 5 a.m. I awoke very abruptly, as if something startled me. To say I awoke is a bit of a misnomer. What actually happened was sleep paralysis. If you've never experienced that before, it's one of the most frightening ways to wake up, because you're mentally nearly awake, but your body is completely unresponsive. I only get this when I sleep on my back, which is why I try to avoid it unless necessary. I was lying there, conscious, unable to move, freaking out, but I had the sense to remember that it will pass, and I would regain motor ability shortly. The sound of a thunderstorm coming from my computer's speakers didn't help. My body ache was still present, and even though I couldn't move, I could still feel it. In my youth, I would get what's colloquially referred to as the old Heg syndrome, a condition in sleep paralysis where you feel as if there is a demon of some sort on your chest, constraining your breathing. Some people will actually see red, lucidly dream it on their chest. Others merely feel it and construct it in their minds. As a kid with a vivid imagination, I would often see it. Luckily for me as an adult, that didn't happen, but my paranoid thoughts of it happening at that very moment gave me enough of a panic to simulate the feeling of actually seeing the hag. After what felt like hours but was actually seconds, I started to break out of it by being able to wiggle my toes. The relief experienced at that moment can't be described. I quickly propped myself up and sat up on the edge of my bed as I tried to catch my breath. I chuckled at what I had done to freak myself out and stood up to use the restroom. As I walked to my bathroom, being in the second bedroom meant my bathroom was not inside my room like the master bedroom. I heard a noise coming from the other side of the house. I assumed it was the cat and continued after I finished my business and headed back to my room. I heard it again. I stopped for a second in the darkness to listen. Nothing. I started to enter my room and heard it again. I called out for Alfie, the cat, and received no response. Then again. That's not at all surprising, considering cats don't really give a shit about you or your beckoning calls unless there's something in it for them. I went in my room and turned off the thunderstorm sound, then stood there waiting for the noise again. The noise was strange. It wasn't quite time, per se, but it seemed to follow somewhat of a pattern, but not anything precise enough to be predictable. The best way I can describe it is to think of someone with an axe chopping at a tree. Each swing isn't perfectly timed, so you can't really predict with any exactitude when it'll happen next, but you have a general idea based on past swings. It alarmed me a bit since I knew for a fact I was home alone. I cautiously proceeded to move around slowly as I looked for the source of the sound. As I approached my sister's room, I noticed the door was closed. Her door was rarely ever closed, even when she was home asleep. I momentarily froze. Then I heard the noise again, however. This time it was much louder. That noise was so loud it scared the shit out of Alfie, the cat, and I heard him jet from his position on the couch directly into my bedroom, presumably under my bed. My heart started to race. If it's not the cat making the noise, what the hell is? I was scared, so I ran to the kitchen as fast as I could and grabbed a knife. The kitchen was next to the front door, as far as possible from the master bedroom, but definitely still within ear-and-eye shot, so I felt a bit more in control. Feeling marginally more confident, I called out, "Who the fuck is there?" No response. "I'm serious. Who the fuck is in there? I have a knife." My sister had a small katana collection, just 3 swords, and I would have loved to have one of those shits, but it dawned on me that it was in her room in clear view of anyone who would be in there. That thought scared me a bit more, because there I was yelling at some intruder about how I'm going to cut him with my little steak knife, when they potentially had 3 very long, very sharp, very durable Japanese samurai swords. I was about to yell again when I heard something that chilled me to the core. I heard a voice. It was a man's voice, a very, very deep voice. I couldn't make out what the hell it said, because it was pretty muffled through the walls. The noise happened again, but this time it was louder than it had ever been. It sounded like a struggle almost, but there were no voices beyond the man's voice. The voice boomed louder, almost as if chanting, and while I still couldn't make out what it said, the ominous sound of the voice coupled with the fact that there seemed to be someone in there, ransacking the place, and their access to murder weapons made the hairs on my back stand up. I couldn't handle it anymore. I knew for a fact my sister wasn't home. I received a text from her earlier in the day when she arrived in New York. No one else on the planet had a spare key to that apartment besides my father, and my father would never just go into our place unannounced in the middle of the night. It had to be something else. I ran out of the apartment as quickly as I could. I didn't lock the door. I didn't even close it. I just ran. Fuck the elevator. I ran toward the stairs. When I finally made it downstairs and entered my car, I immediately took off with no hesitation whatsoever. I thought about calling the police, but I called my dad instead. I got to my parents' house. They lived very close by, and my dad was already waiting for me. I told him my story, and he said I should have called the cops. I guess he was right, but people make irrational decisions when in fear. The sun was already coming out, so the ominous feel of it all was starting to fade away. My dad and I decided to go there together and survey what was happening from a distance. We parked in my spot and looked up at my apartment door. It was slightly open, just barely. but that's because I didn't really close it on my way out. We decided to get the condo security guard involved. I told him my story, and he came with us. We took the elevator up and slowly entered the apartment. It was silent, no noises at all. The master bedroom door was still closed. My dad grabbed a knife, the same knife I was holding earlier, and we all crept up to the door and just stood there for a second while the security guard gripped his walkie-talkie for dear life. My dad asked, "Is anyone in there?" "Nothing. There are 3 of us," I said. My father reluctantly grabbed the door handle. He very quickly turned it and pushed the door open. The room was pristine, just as she had left it. Nothing was out of place. The window was open. She does that from time to time for the fresh air. But it was the 5th floor with just about impossible access through the window. So unless Spider-Man was moonlighting as a deranged criminal, no one was making their way through that. At that point, all of us relaxed a bit and let down our guard. The security guard looked at my dad, and my dad looked at me. He wasn't in disbelief. He just seemed sort of like he was internally questioning whether my story was true or if I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I started explaining to him that I'm not crazy and that everything I told him was the truth. My dad seemed to believe me, but the security guard was having none of that. That's when my dad looked at the bathroom door. There was a thick, dark ooze that was dark red, almost black. Instantly, all of our guards went up again. The security guard freaked out like I've never seen anyone do before, and he ran out. I could hear him on his walkie-talkie frantically reporting exactly what's going on, the apartment number, saying to hurry up, etc. My dad and I stayed, and he called out yet again for someone to respond, but alas, no response. While there was no noise emanating from the bathroom, we did start to notice a smell. It was strange, not quite pungent, although close, slightly sweet, but mostly like tar. "It smells a little like tar and sewage," I said, right there. My dad's guard dropped, and he opened the door nonchalantly. Tar everywhere, the toilet destroyed, the ceiling mostly collapsed, bath liquid products all over the place. As it turns out, my sister had left her bathroom light on. That light is tied to one of those air fan things to vent the shit smell out of the bathroom. I guess something happened where it overheated and started melting the tar in the ceiling. The periodic sound I heard earlier was the fan spinning and throwing tar all over the place, as well as pieces of the ceiling falling off. The loud crash was when the fan piece broke off, fell, and landed on the toilet. The hot tar weakened the ceramic and the fan, as well as other parts of the ceiling falling, broke the toilet into various pieces. The red tinge in the goose scene from the bottom of the floor was just a cocktail of shampoos, conditioners, body washes, etc. As for the voice, why was the room door closed? My sister had a small, battery-powered bumbox, and in it was a language-learning Farsi cassette tape. I guess the damn cat turned it on while messing about, and the batteries began to run out, which explains why it was speaking so slowly and deeply, why I couldn't understand what was being said, and why it eventually stopped. That same cat seemingly also closed her bedroom door by playing with a piece of decor, some rope thing, and pulling it, thus closing the door. He's done that before. I don't know why it didn't occur to me earlier. Like I said, fear makes you think irrationally. I had never before been so scared in my life, but I'm at least glad I wasn't on the verge of being murdered. That would have really messed with my weekend. When my sister returned from New York that Monday evening, we were in her room, and I told her an abridged version of what happened. She found my misfortune hilarious. The bathroom was still a mess, but it was going to be fixed the next day. She wasn't too thrilled about the mess her bathroom was in and the fact that she needed to use mine until it was fully repaired. "At least my room is still clean," she said as she opened the small boombox's empty battery compartment. And my eyes widened upon the realization, but you could have at least put that katana back in its place.